Okay, thank you very much, Ivanan and Roberto. All right, so it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Maurice Herlihy. Maurice is actually one of the very first few people that I met in my career in OPODIS 2005. Hard to believe it's 16 years ago. He is the Anne Wine Professor of Computer Science at Brown University. He has a degree in mathematics from Harvard and a PhD from MIT. He has served on the faculty of CMU and as the staff of DEC Cambridge Research Lab. Maurice has a long list of prizes and recognitions, among which is the 2003 Dijkstra Prize, the 2004 Gödel Prize, 2008 ISCA Inflation Paper Award, the 2012 Dijkstra Prize, 2013 Wallace McDowell Award. He received the 2012 Fulbright Distinguished Chair in the Natural Sciences and Engineering Lecturing Fellowship. Besides all of that, what we know Maurice as is two pieces of work that everybody in distributed computing knows, which are the notion of linearizability, the topological reasoning techniques for distributed systems, transactional memory. These are just a few of things that that Maurice has done seminal work, and the community has built a lot of work on top of it. So it's again my great pleasure to introduce Maurice, and I cannot wait to hear your talk.
I'd like to thank Borzu and the team for inviting me to virtual Chicago. Let me set up my screen share here. Okay, I assume everyone can see my screen here.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to describe joint work with my colleagues Barbara Liskov and Luba Shvira and my student Ingjae Shui. So I'm going to talk about something that we call adversarial commerce, which is going to start out sounding somewhat exotic, but eventually is going to look very familiar. So here we have our friend Bob, who runs a theater. We have friend Alice, who is willing to pay for theater tickets. And sorry, Carol has the theater tickets and Alice is a ticket broker. Now, all of this happens in the future when everything of value lives on a blockchain or some form of distributed ledger. And so our goal here is to set up a deal where Carol pays 101 coins to Alice, the broker. Alice takes her commission and forwards the 100 coins to Bob, who then sends the tickets to Carol. So this is an indirect transfer where Bob and Carol don't necessarily know about each other directly. They both interact through Alice. And this is the way a lot of commerce in the real world is done. So it's not a direct transfer. It's you're going through a well-known market maker. And if we can do this kind of exchange, then everyone is happy. You know, we've increased utility, done everything that improved everyone's situation. Now, of course, this is hard to do, especially if you're working on technology such as blockchains, because nobody trusts anybody, and typically for good reason. When we say that Bob and Carol don't know each other, that is, on the one hand, that's great because it says that they can both do well without having social connections. On the other hand, who knows who they are? What kind of a scammer could they be? So it could be that Carol is plotting to steal Bob's coins. It could be that Bob is trying to get the tickets for free. Alice, could be faking it. She could just be an agent of chaos. She's trying to create as much disruption as possible. And the goal here is to make sure that everything works, even if the parties, even if everyone, or at least most of the people in the deal are trying to pick one another's pockets. Now, right now, I'm being deliberately vague about the correctness conditions that we're looking for, because defining these correctness conditions is the point of the talk. So I'm going to set up the problem, talk about some examples, talk about various concerns, talk about why the traditional notions of correctness aren't sufficient for this kind of environment. And then try to make some steps towards finding more suitable conditions. So what could go wrong? Well, one thing that could go wrong is that Bob transferred his tickets and he didn't get paid, possibly because Alice and Carol were conspiring against him. After all, it may be a Sybil attack. Maybe Alice and Carol are the same person. So we say, well, this is, whatever our protocol does, this should be unacceptable. Where an honest Bob tries to exchange his tickets for money and doesn't get the money. What else could go wrong is Carol could pay for the tickets and not get them. And that could happen maybe by accident. It could happen as a result of nefarious plotting by Alice and Bob. And that's also unacceptable. It could be that something goes wrong and Alice ends up having custody of both the tickets and the coins. Now, maybe Alice is dishonest and she's going to go have a night on the town, or maybe she's honest and she's distressed because now she has to figure out some way to return the coins and the tickets so as not to damage her reputation as a broker. But this is also clearly an unacceptable outcome. Now, another possible outcome is that the deal doesn't go through. Something goes wrong. And this is actually acceptable. So if something breaks, then one acceptable outcome is to say, well, nothing happened. No money changed hands. No assets changed hands. And this isn't an outcome that we want, but this is an outcome we are willing to accept as something that we want to live with. So more generally, we in a situation where we have a number of parties who don't know and trust one another, and there is mutual economic benefit if they cooperate with each other, but they don't trust each other, and there's no enforcement. There's no all of the instruments of civilization, lawyers, courts, police have no power in this domain. So we need to set things up in such a way that bad things don't happen to begin with, because we have no mechanism for rolling back the effects of bad transactions. And so the idea here is something that we call a cross-chain deal, which is distantly related to distributed transactions. And we'll explore exactly how that relationship works. But we have a number of parties who own assets. An asset could be cryptocurrency, could be a token representing a stock, it could be a token representing real estate, automobiles, any item of value. And they want to trade them with their counterparties. And we want to do things like we can do direct swaps, we can do indirect swaps, as in the brokerage, the ticket broker example that we saw before. We can do auctions. we can do options, we can do futures, all of the instruments of modern finance, we would want to be able to do in this kind of adversarial, decentralized world. Now, we're going to assume that each asset lives on its own database or blockchain. Again, the correct abstraction here is a ledger. A blockchain refers to a particular technology. We're not wedded to that, although I'm going to talk about blockchains just to be specific. But it could also be a replicated, high-speed, secure, tamper-proof database. It could be some technology that hasn't been invented yet. A lot of existing technologies that call themselves blockchains are not technically chains of blocks, but they still call themselves that, so you know what they're talking about. And the important thing here is that parties are autonomous. Each party can do what it wants. Each party can follow the protocol, not follow the protocol. Each party can cheat, lie, and steal. So it's a much more demanding environment than our conventional notions of distributed computing. And again, nobody trusts anyone. And I want to argue that this is not a passing fad. There is a lot of skepticism towards specific instances of blockchains. People who, there are all kinds of people who disparage a Bitcoin. There are people who disparage this blockchain, that blockchain. There are people who say that the entire blockchain decentralized finance space is one big scam. But that doesn't really need to concern us here. So I'm not concerned here with specific technologies, although of course these are important when you need to execute something. And really, it doesn't matter if blockchains fall out of favor and are replaced by something else. What's really important is that we have this, people are going to want to do commerce. People are going to want to do commerce on the internet. People are going to want to do commerce with parties that they don't trust. The international and anonymous nature of these interactions means that recourse to legal action and enforcement will be imperfect at best. And so what we're interested in here is kind of the underlying science of how do you do commercial activities among parties that don't trust one another and have no ability to enforce deals after the fact. Now, since all of you are familiar with distributed computing, you know that it's common to formulate problems in terms of an adversary. So really what we want is fault tolerance for some notion of faults and some notion of tolerance. One way to think about this is to say, well, imagine that we have an adversary who is trying to frustrate our purposes. It may be trying to steal things, maybe trying to delay things, generally causing grief. We are going to design our systems, our protocols, our algorithms with this adversary in mind. Now, in classical distributed computing, we have kind of a cute and manageable adversary. We talk about algorithms that tolerate timing failures, crashes, mission failures, and in the limit, Byzantine failures, which are generally viewed as kind of hardware malfunctions. The problems that we want to solve are typically very precisely stated, bounded mathematical problems. We want to do consensus. We want to do case-set agreement. We want to do state machine replication. These are very clearly defined problems, so we know when they're solved. Everything is, in some sense, very precisely defined. And this is a virtue, and this is the result of a lot of work by a lot of people for a long time. But the modern world is, the adversary is much more sinister. The adversary to your system might not be a malfunctioning sensor somewhere or an overloaded network switch. It might be a hacker. It might be a hacker that is funded by a state-sponsored agency that has lots of money, that is trying to cause as much chaos as possible and not dissuaded by rational economic incentives. So the adversary, may not be content with simply, crashing your system or stealing your money. They may be trying to create as much social disruption as possible. So this is a much more demanding adversary. The kinds of attacks are much more sophisticated. So the good attackers don't respect abstraction boundaries. And for this reason, you typically have to look at the system as a whole to guard against all of these very sophisticated kinds of approaches. The problems that you're trying to solve are, social problems, big system problems, problems that are hard to pin down in a mathematical sense. So it's much more of an arms race than a geometry theorem. You can fix or ameliorate one problem, and your adversary comes up with a better attack. You need to reiterate. So in some sense, things are never really over. And what we want to do is we want to say, well, what does it take to do commerce in this kind of open-ended, against this kind of open-ended adversary, where we know very little about the adversary, but the adversary has lots of resources at its disposal. So what I want to argue in this talk is that our conventional notions of correctness for atomic transactions and distributed systems aren't adequate for this much more challenging and somewhat ill-defined world. The problems that we're looking at are important problems that are not going to go away regardless of changes in technology. But the way we think about these things also has to undergo a change. And of course, being a keynote talk, I'm going to raise more questions than answers. Sometimes it's pure laziness and time limits, and sometimes nobody actually knows the answer. So if you look in any of the classic textbooks on distributed transactions, they list these ACID properties: atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. And the temptation is to say, well, these were good enough for when I was in grad school, they should be good enough for us now. These are eternal truths that we should bear in mind as we set forward into this challenging world. And I'm going to argue that this isn't actually true. Some of my objections are fairly fundamental. Some of them may seem a little bit pedantic, but even the pedantic exceptions are important, because if we want to argue that we're correct, we better be using the correct notion of correctness. And so the naively taking the classical properties as your correctness condition will not deter or frustrate our adversaries. So there's been a lot of work on adversarial models. Fault models, we started out with, crashes, then moved on to Byzantine. There's a lot of elaborate notions. Paxos and RAF, the two most popular state machine replication practical algorithms. You assume that the majority doesn't crash, and then there's some complication about partitions. Most Byzantine protocols say, well, we're fine as long as more than 2/3 of the participants behave themselves. And sometimes 2/3 is higher, depending on the specific protocol that you're looking at. There's some very nice work on saying, well, splitting things into Byzantine versus well-behaved is naive. Sometimes we have Byzantine who misbehave, altruistic who always behave, and rational who behave if they're incentivized to do so. And what I want to argue is that none of these is really adequate for the kind of world that we need to be able to do this kind of adversarial commerce. So I'm going to divide parties. We'll say conforming parties follow the protocol. So if Roberto, Borzu, Yvonne An, and I decide to do some kind of a deal, we're going to set up a protocol of the forum. You do move your money into escrow, you do here, you release this key, and you do that. So there's a default protocol, and anyone who actually follows the protocol is conforming. I don't care about their motivation. I don't care whether this makes economic sense. I don't care if this is for virtue. If you do what you're supposed to do, you're conforming. And if you're deviating, you could do anything. And here too, I'm not assuming that the deviating parties are rational. We don't know what their objective functions are. You know, they may be trying to steal your money. They may be trying to destroy your society. You know, that's of no concern. Either you stick to the protocol or you deviate from the protocol. These are the only distinctions that we need. So this is a very simple model of a failure. It says that some number may deviate, some number may conform. There's no bound on the number of deviating parties. Now, in other parts of the system, when we talk about, say, implementing a blockchain, then the rules are different. There you may need 2/3 of the BFT participants are correct. But at the commerce level, if I answer some ads on Craigslist and say, oh, let's do a deal, there's no reason to assume that a majority of the other people who want to do a deal are honest. Even, you know, with Sybil attacks and so on, you know, they might all be the same person playing different roles. So all we're going to do is say that you're either conforming or you're deviating. And for all I know, I might be conforming, but for all I know, everybody else in the deal is deviating. Now, returning to the classical notions of correctness, the notion of atomicity is key. So atomicity says either all steps happen or none do. You know, I launch a transaction and it commits and everything happens, or it aborts and nothing happens. But all or nothing is impossible to enforce when the transactions are executed by autonomous parties who can't be constrained to follow the protocol. You know, if I join in some kind of a deal with an unknown party and they give me all their money, I can't really prevent that. And my protocol can't prevent that. And if I try to prove the protocol prevents that, it's going to be awkward because it doesn't, because I have no control over what they do. So saying that you know, classical atomicity is impossible to realize in a situation where the parties are autonomous. Instead, we're going to refine this and break this down and say, well, if all parties conform, then the deal happens. And here conforming encompasses having your hardware work and so on. So everything goes well, then the transfers go through. That's the minimum liveness property you want. And the safety property version of atomicity, it says if some parties deviate, then the conforming parties end up no worse off. You might technically conceivably end up better off, but you won't be worse off. Now, of course, you're all looking at that no worse off and saying, that looks, you know, highly suspicious. What does that mean? What does it mean to say that if you're honest and conforming, that you end up no worse off? Well, of course, it's a complicated subject that I can't exhaust here. But one way to think about this is to use a little bit of Cookbook game theory. You know, nothing terribly profound, but some useful vocabulary. So cross-chain commerce is what game theory people call a cooperative game. And a protocol is a strategy for that game. So a game is a set of steps you can make, a set of you know, state transitions is kind of, you know, a shared automaton. And a protocol is a strategy that says that if this happens, I will do that. And of course, with civil attacks and so on, we assume that parties can form coalitions and they can agree among themselves to follow a strategy, even possibly an alternative strategy. And the result to each player of following a strategy is called the payoff. So this is the vocabulary that we use to talk about no worse off. So one payoff, the one that everyone wants, is that the deal happens. So the vertex in the middle represents a party to the deal. Incoming arrows say that everything that the party was expecting to receive, it received. The outgoing arcs say that everything it paid. And so this is, we commit the transaction, everything happens. A alternative, which we can call no deal, says, well, I didn't acquire anything and I didn't pay anything. So I'm exactly where I was before, and this is the analog to aborting the transaction. But in a world where you can't control the behavior of the participants, weird things can happen. A free ride happens when somebody actually pays me, but I don't pay anyone. Maybe this happened by accident. Maybe I was conforming and this happened. Maybe I'm lying and cheating, and I somehow tricked somebody into paying me. So that means I got something for nothing. A discount says that I got everything I expected to get, but I paid less. Somehow an outgoing transfer didn't happen. So this is a, I got something cheaper than expected. That also can't be, even if I'm conforming, that could happen because maybe my recipient deviated somehow. And finally is, I could have some complex situation where some incoming asset that I expected to receive did not arrive and some outgoing payments didn't happen. And this is kind of chaotic. So we can rank these from better to worse. So deal has to be viewed by every participant as better than no deal, because otherwise, why would you join in this deal to begin with? If you're better off doing nothing, you wouldn't do this thing. A discount is better than deal because you get the same thing that you expected to get out of the deal, but you paid less. So that's a reasonable assumption that you would prefer discount to deal. You would prefer free ride to a no deal because it says that I got something for nothing. Maybe you prefer deal to a free ride because you would have ended up happier if you completed the deal, but it's certainly better than no deal. And underwater, where you didn't get everything you expected and you paid something for it, is worse than no deal. And so what we're going to say is no worse off is any of these outcomes, and worse off is the chaotic underwater outcome. Now, you can dispute this in some cases. Some underwater outcomes may, under specialized circumstances, be better than no deal, but I'm going to put this out there and leave it to future work to kind of refine this. But the point is that you can define these outcomes, you can rank them, and we can argue about circumstances under which they're applicable. So that's how the notion of atomicity needs to be changed. Next is the notion of consistency. So consistency basically states that application-specific constraints are respected. In the classical database world, they say, well, this means that if I transfer money from one account to another account, then money isn't created or destroyed. There's some invariant that's preserved. This particular property has always bothered me somewhat because it's the only one that's kind of talks about the semantics of the application, and it never seems to be well defined from my point of view. But we're going to replace this with another application-specific property, which is basically that the protocol should be set up so that participants have a rational interest in following the protocol. This doesn't mean they will, and this certainly doesn't mean you can assume they will, but you need to set things up so that everything is incentive aligned. So we're going to use the term strong Nash equilibrium. Here again, everybody picks a common strategy. But if a coalition deviates from the strategy, it won't be better off. So a Nash equilibrium says that no individual is better off by deviating. A strong Nash equilibrium says that no coalition is better off by deviating. There are other terms that mean the same thing that game theory people throw around. So this says that if we conspire to deviate, we won't objectively be better off according to this game theoretic ranking. We may do so anyway because, of course, maybe we don't care about that ranking. Maybe we have a larger plan that isn't captured by our game theory. So, for example, here is a multi-party swap. So each vertex is a party. Each arc is represents a possible transfer of an asset. Coins, stamps, sheep, Bitcoin, all of these things. And the idea is that each party, has an asset and they want to atomically transfer to the other party. So you only want to transfer your asset out if you get all your assets in. Now, there's a theorem that says that a protocol that ensures that every conforming party ends up no worse off, that is, any protocol that satisfies our Adamicity condition, is also a strong Nash equilibrium if and only if the directed graph is strongly connected. So this takes relates the game theoretic aspects of the deal to the topological properties of this graph. And of course, I won't go through the proof, but I can, there's a very clear intuition why this is true. So here is a swap graph that isn't strongly connected. So here we have the pink part. There's no path from the pink part back to the yellow part. So these people are in some sense free riders. So they are getting things. Assets are flowing into the subgraph, but nothing is flowing out. So they are acquiring assets without paying for them. And Alice says, well, you know what? If I don't pay Bob, no one's going to notice because I'm not getting anything back from Bob. What happens if he gets angry? Who cares? He's not giving me anything. I'm just going to pretend I pay him and not pay him. And in fact, nobody in the yellow part of the graph is going to notice. So Alice gets a better payoff in this case if she deviates from the protocol. So it would be foolish to set up a protocol like this because Alice would probably never agree to join. And if she did join and she's rational, that means she's intending to cheat. So this kind of thing doesn't make any sense. So if we make the graph strongly connected again, then the pink nodes are not free riders anymore because they're paying for the privilege of joining in the protocol. And Alice says, well, I better pay because if I don't pay, then bad things will happen. The whole thing will, probably abort and no assets will change hands and no one will be better off because that pink version, the pink region of the graph that was formerly disconnected is now connected and it can withhold something that it's supposed to send. So this is that it's a better payoff for Alice to comply. And this is what we want. The next property in the acid trilogy is isolation. So isolation says that no transaction sees another transaction's intermediate states. And this is important because it says in some sense that if you have, it's related to consistency in the sense that if every transaction preserves some invariant, then no transaction will ever see that invariant temporarily violated by another transaction because you either see the state world before the transaction or the world after the transaction. And from this sort of informally stated, we get all kinds of familiar consistency properties like serializability, linearizability, snapshot consistency, and so on. There's a huge amount of database literature on different kinds of isolation mechanisms, some of which are stronger than others, some of which are easier to implement than others. So what is the analog of isolation for decentralized commerce? Well, turns out the classical notions aren't very helpful. That if you look at the actual protocols, now we haven't talked about actual protocols because I don't have time to march through them, but typically they take the form, Borzou and I want to do a swap. So I'll put something into escrow. As soon as Borzou sees that I put my asset into escrow, he'll put his asset into escrow. Once I see that Borzou has put his asset into escrow, I'll release the key, and so on. So these protocols have a very, it's like Cold War prisoner exchanges. You do one thing and then someone else does something else. There is no notion of isolation here. There's a lot of interaction between the parties. So the notions of serializability, linearizability, snapshot consistency, and so on aren't really appropriate for this kind of environment. Instead, what I'm going to claim is the natural analog is that once an asset is placed into escrow, it can't be unlocked until the deal is complete. So an escrow account is a intermediate account. So I take an asset that I have custody of, that I control, and I put it in an escrow account where I no longer control it. It's controlled typically by a smart contract. And this guarantees that I can grab my asset and run away at some point. Once it's in escrow, it's like a time lock safe. It says for the next 24 hours, I can't take that asset back, and this gives my counterparty confidence to proceed. So the equivalent of a lock in this kind of commerce is an escrow account. But there's another property, which is that assets can't be locked in escrow forever. So these smart contracts are very literal-minded programs, and I could say, well, I'm going to put my account in escrow. Now you take your step, and my counterparty says, haha, and walks away. Then my account, my assets are locked up forever, and that's no good. So you need some kind of timeout that says, well, it seems like the deal fell through. I'm going to refund everything to everyone. And of course, designing protocols so that timeouts can't be abused is a tricky business, and people write papers about that kind of thing. But there's a related problem, which as far as I can tell, doesn't have any analog in the database world, which is called lockup briefing. So the idea is that we have a deal. I put my assets into an escrow with a timeout, and my counterparty walks away. So on the one hand, I get my money back. So I'm not stolen, nothing is stolen, but only after a long delay. Timeouts on these protocols tend to be very long. If your blockchain has a, say, 10-minute transaction time, then a typical lockup time is 24 hours. Now, this is unfortunate in the fast and furious blockchain world, because assets are highly volatile. The price of Bitcoin, goes up and down. Stable coins, might collapse. And so if your assets are locked up, you might miss the party. So there's a very real cost into having someone, march away while your assets are locked up. This is, roughly comparable to the motivation for lock-free synchronization. If someone locks up a data structure and then walks away, then you can't do any business. If somebody locks up all your Bitcoin for 48 hours, then that's an eternity in this space. So my PhD student, Yingjae Shui, looked at that, and hopefully she'll be on the job market next year, and came up with a start to looking at this, something that we call hedged deals. Now, in the real world, if you go to Wall Street and you set up a deal where at some point I can choose to exercise the deal or I can choose to walk away, that's called an option. And I don't get options for free. I pay for an option. So I can go to you and say, okay, I'd like to lock in the price of 1 million shares of Apple stock for the next 24 hours. And 24 hours from now, I can either buy that stock or I can choose not to exercise the option, but I have to pay to do that. And that fee is typically called the premium. So what you would like to say is, if I set up one of these deals where at some point one party can walk away and leave everyone else inconvenienced, then they should pay a fee, not to punish the wrongdoer, but to compensate the victims. Now, if you think about this, then you see that there's kind of a nested atomicity problem. So we set up the deal that we want to do, and that requires some kind of atomicity mechanism. But then we want to set up a fee structure so that if somebody walks away from the deal, then they pay the premium, which means putting premiums into escrow. But what if you walk away during the premium escrow? So fortunately, if you nest these deals, sooner or later you get to an amount where you say, actually, I don't mind so much, or this gets locked up for 48 hours because it's only $1. And so there's a lot of very interesting technical questions underneath here. There are general questions, which I think deserve to be looked in the future. If a deal falls apart, how do you determine who's guilty? There are technical limitations on what smart contracts can do and observe. And so how do you design a protocol so that if somebody abandons it in the middle, that they pay the fine? Because don't forget, everyone is trying to steal from you. What if I can sabotage a protocol and place the blame on someone else? How do we bootstrap the premiums? You know, if I need to escrow a large amount to safeguard that, I then need to escrow a premium. But how do I safeguard that? So there's an infinite recursion problem that can be partly solved by saying, well, eventually, if it's a 1% deposit at each level, it's small enough to ignore. And to what extent can hedging be automated? Can I write a compiler that takes a protocol for a deal and automatically puts in the hedging fees to compensate victims if something breaks or someone walks away? These are all kind of open questions. And we have a start on this problem, at the last PodC, which recommend people look at. Okay, so to kind of wind up, the very last property in the acid list of properties is the easiest one. Here, this says that committed transactions survive crashes. So this is a kind of high-level abstract way of saying, well, for most of the late 20th century, memory was divided into fast volatile memory and slow non-volatile memory. And we do all our computation in fast volatile memory, and we use the slow memory as a backup. But when things crash, our abstractions are broken, and everyone can see that our volatile memory has gone away and our stable memory has survived. So we have elaborate protocols for saying, well, before I commit a transaction, I need to force all of its changes to a non-volatile memory, to basically write things to disk. And so you abstract this by saying, well, if the transaction commits, then even if the participant crashes and comes back up, that we didn't lose the effects of the transaction. So this is the same kind of deal for transactions for adversarial commerce. But here we get into a lot of the ideological and sort of doctrinal motivation for things like blockchains, is that in addition to crashes, where a volatile memory loses power, we're also concerned with much larger issues like so-called censorship by governments, corporations, hackers, any kind of power. This says that you should be able to make deals and do commerce, even if your government doesn't like that. Now, we can argue about whether that's actually a good idea to have all this unregulated commerce, and I'm not taking a position on this, but to a first approximation, we would like to say that if I make a deal and I transfer my Bitcoin in return for your NFTs, that this isn't undone by hardware failures, by court action, by treachery by any of the other parties. And so this is, in some sense, a much stronger requirement than what we're used to with classical databases, but it's in kind of the same spirit. Okay, so that's pretty much the point of what I wanted to say. What we're all familiar with notions of atomic transactions. These things started in the database world. They went on to distributed systems. There are lots and lots of different variations of correctness properties, but the acid properties are kind of the standard. Even systems that don't satisfy acid properties, the acid properties are the systems they explain they don't satisfy. What I want to propose here is that although it's tempting to think that these carry on to the kind of next generation of electronic commerce and blockchains and so on, they really don't. That a lot of the work in blockchain world, and people get angry when I say this, is really reinventing classical distributed computing under new names. But conversely, this blockchain world does add a lot of interesting new twists. In particular, the kind of anarchic, hyper-Byzantine nature of these interactions. And this means that we need to rethink our properties. Some properties have to be weaker. We cannot provide all or nothing. It's physically impossible. So we need to figure out what the replacement is. Other properties like censorship resistance have to be much, much stronger than the ability to survive power failures and crashes. And each of these things, particularly if you want to formally prove that your system is correct, you need to start with the right specification. And so what I'm trying to do here is to provoke people into rethinking correctness properties. It's okay with me if you want to quibble with the particular properties that I've chosen. Whether you agree with the particulars or not, I want to kind of challenge any degree of complacency you might have in terms of your correctness positions. So again, I'll go back to a point that I raised before. There's a lot of controversy and hype about blockchains. This isn't really about blockchains, although it's convenient to situate this whole thing in a blockchain environment. It's really about the problem of doing commerce. You could replace blockchains with databases, and everything I say would basically be true. So the technology is going to change, the applications may change, but the need to reason about your algorithms and the need to choose appropriate correctness conditions isn't going to go away ever. Okay, so I guess I have a little bit of time left, so I can take questions. I guess the easiest way is just to, speak up.
Thank you very much, Maurice. So that was a virtual applaud. Yes, let's switch to questions. Either speak up on Zoom or raise your hand on Zoom. We also have a Slack channel. Feel free to post your questions on the Slack channel. Yeah, let's go ahead with the questions.
Let's see. Yes. So, am I on the Slack channel?
I can read out the questions to you, Maurice, on Slack.
Yes. Yes. Why don't you do that?
Maurice, let me. This is Roberto Palmieri. Let me ask a scary question. Consistency is already complex enough, right? So, formal verification from my standpoint, became a real thing when people decide to put money on consensus algorithms that we used to publish without really being rigorous in verifying them and making sure that the properties that we claimed are actually provided. Formal verification became so important. Defining algorithms that actually do what we say is critical. When you mention Nash equilibrium in helping reasoning about the new notion of correctness made me think, how about proving that these properties are then ensured by what we're designing, by our algorithms? We will have to rethink about techniques and proofs and formal verification techniques that are now evolving rapidly. Have you thought about that?
So I'm not really an expert in these conditions, but if I were doing that, this would be paradise, because for a long time, formal verification was kind of respected, but not really taken seriously. And now there are literally billions of dollars resting on these protocols. So you bet that the people who are putting their money on the line would be willing to sponsor work in formal verification. Conversely, I think putting your money on a blockchain that doesn't have some level of formal verification is crazy. So, plus, verification technology has advanced quite a bit. So this should be, the golden age of formal verification, because people care about it. They're huge, huge things at stake, and we can now see how to do things that couldn't be done before. I'm actually a little envious.
Maurice, this is Jennifer Welch. How are you?
Hi, Jennifer.
So did you think anything about what might make sense for complexity studies in this world? Like, I always see these headlines that, Bitcoin uses more energy than a small country or whatever.
Oh yeah. So complexity is a completely unplowed field here. So the reason that Bitcoin is hugely inefficient, because basically Bitcoin is evil, but other blockchains that use other kinds of consensus are way less evil. There's certainly there's bounds on all of these things rely on some form of Byzantine agreement, and any lower bounds for Byzantine agreement apply here. For the kinds of commerce things that I'm looking at, there are all kinds of unexplored lower bounds, like timeouts. The timeouts on these things tend to be huge because you need to be conservative. And there are ways of avoiding the timeouts that require other kinds of compromises, but nobody has any lower bounds on the complexity of these atomic swap or atomic transaction algorithms. I have no reason to believe they're hard. It's just such a new area that nobody's worked on it before. And this is also something that is of great interest to practical people, because people really do set up these complex cross-chain transactions, or at least plan to. And right now they use ad hoc mechanisms, and nobody knows whether you could improve things. I suspect a lot of them are probably already as good as they can get, but there's zero formal understanding of lower bounds and complexity in the cross-chain protocol area.
Thanks.
Other questions?
So I can follow up with tangential questions that are also related to how we teach about this problem. So when we explain transactions and properties to our students, bank, deposit and withdraw is the example they have been using for a long time, and kind of still fit certain, if we're not talking about blockchain. Now, a lot of the things that you, Maurice, said are basically inspired by your own knowledge of finance, business, how to make deals, which are usually not traditional CS, common knowledge, let me say. When we review, when we define what makes sense as a next property to ensure in our system, it often comes from these literally business requirements. Without a model to formalize that, what's good, what's reasonable, what's an interesting property to guarantee or to design for? How do you approach yourself that problem?
So there's a kind of a progression where you start out and say, well, we want to do a cross-chain swap, and then you say, well, if we want to do a cross-chain swap, then we need this atomicity property. Oh wait, if somebody walks away, then you're basically stealing from someone. You're inconveniencing them. But wait, yet again, these things have been known in finance since the Renaissance. How to deal with these things. It's all options and all this other financial machinery, and there is the barrier because I'm on a program committee for mixed computer science economics conference, and for the first time I've read math papers by economists, and let me tell you, it makes me feel much better about the rigor of the mathematics used in computer science. Mathematicians sniff at computer scientists. Well, I sniff at economists. Maybe I shouldn't have said that on the recording, but the ideas aren't hard. It's just they're kind of wrapped in this jargon. And
it's more the social aspects that you were talking about. You can't just gain directly. You can do that for other kind of reasons. They can still drag the system or try to bias the system in certain behavior, and those are usually beyond what's traditional you gain from directly interacting in a business.
Well, I think a lot of our students have used PayPal, right. And on PayPal, there's always a danger that you're being scammed. Mm-hmm. And so in some sense they'll have an intuitive understanding of this because they're used to. PayPal scams, catfishing, all these, even my kids, when they were third grade, they were taught not to, to be aware of, over-friendly people on Facebook and so on. Right. So I think, our students have a good intuitive understanding of the, treacherous nature of, of the world. And so I've never had any trouble convincing them that blockchain-like properties are useful.
Rui has a question.
Hi, Herlihy. Thank you. Rui Oliveira from Inesctec at the University of Minho. Well, congrats for your talk and actually your crusade for clarifying many of these things that we've been working on for a long time. And actually, somehow following up of Palmieri's question, the thing about not having a concise model, semantics, the correctness criteria of what we are, of the tool upon which we want to develop things, it's really bothering. And that's at a different scale, a much higher scale than it was when we start working with eventual consistency. Whenever we teach our students about acid properties and in particular isolation, all this complexity, all these sometimes difficult to grasp aspects, we can promise them that once they have this middleware, then everything will be easy on top of that. With all the blockchain thing, I can see that everyone applies this to everything they do since they get up until they go to bed. But I cannot understand how you can actually do something other than cryptocurrency without the correctness criteria that you just talked about.
So there plenty of things that are not cryptocurrency that you can transfer, but they're all assets in some sense. You know, if it's not a Bitcoin, then it's a tokenized deed to a car or something like that. So formally, you know, it's all roughly the same. The lack of abstraction is currently a barrier. I don't know whether this is inherently a difficult field to abstract, or we just haven't found the right ones yet. So all of these, composing these protocols, you know, remains kind of a challenge. You know, some properties compose, some properties don't compose. Part of the problem is that this is also a security problem, and security doesn't respect abstraction boundaries. You have an intelligent adversary who can find the cracks in your armor and take advantage of minor discrepancies between different layers of abstraction. So from a formal point of view, like any other security problem, you come up with a threat model, and you say, this is our formal threat model, and then you pray that this is sound. And then you prove things with respect to the threat model. And I think we're kind of stuck with that model for now.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much again, Maurice. So this is the end of the keynote talk. We have 10 minutes break. So let's be back at 10:15. So then the next session is chaired by Amy. If you are a speaker, please recognize yourself to Amy. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. Just a reminder to go on Gather if you wanna go chat with others or use Slack. If you wanna test your equipment, we'll be here. Feel free to just share your screen. As soon as you jump online, we'll promote you as a co-host, so you'll be able to share your screen. If the presenter is different than the one that indicated on the Google form when you upload your videos, please let us know, so we will upgrade you as a co-host. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Maurice.
Hello, can you hear me?